Love is greater. With Easter just 2 weeks away, like Lori mentioned, I have in mind a three-part sort of mini-series along this theme of love is greater. No matter how high our highs, no matter how low our lows, love is greater. No matter what is happening around us, no matter what is happening in us, no matter what is happening to us, love is greater, right? Love is greater. So 2 weeks from now is Resurrection Sunday. And I have in mind to talk about just that, resurrection. More specifically, that the resurrection of Jesus contains the promise of our resurrection, our physical resurrection in bodies fit for eternity. It sounds like something fanciful. It sounds quite mysterious, and I have in mind that we're going to talk about that, but that's 2 weeks from now. Before that, of course, is Good Friday, and like Lori said, we're encouraging you to participate in services at Cedar Park Bothell. The night before that, Maundy Thursday. On that evening, it'll be a more traditional service along the lines of a Tenebrae service with scripture readings and candles and communion. We'll hear a bit from the choir, and it's always really meaningful. I hope you'll make a priority of being here. But before that, of course, is next Sunday, Palm Sunday, and I have in mind to talk about celebrating Jesus as our King. But what about this Sunday? What about this Sunday? The Sunday before Palm Sunday. Anybody know what that's called? Somebody's whispering. The Sunday before Palm Sunday. Yeah, well, I said that, Patrick. It could be the Sunday before Palm Sunday. Some traditions, and I'm getting a little bit far into the weeds here, some traditions refer to this as Passion Sunday, the Sunday that begins Passiontide. Are we all celebrating Passiontide? Yeah, probably not. That's just kind of not the way that we're wired. The last 2 weeks of Lent are often referred to as Passiontide. It's sort of a super Lent, if you will. Super Lent. So this is a season of preparing our hearts and lives for Jesus. So in my simple way of thinking, it's a perfect Sunday to proclaim, here comes Jesus. Here comes Jesus. As we're looking towards these weeks of preparing the way for Jesus into our hearts in these special ways that we have during Holy Week and all, here comes Jesus. I don't know how many here make anything out of Lent. I didn't make a particularly big deal out of it this year. I suspect that there may have been a few more that started out a month ago with some sort of Lent proclamation. Maybe a few less are sticking with it today. I don't know. I don't know how you're wired along those lines. If you started something that you're not exactly prepared to finish, it's okay. There's lots and lots of grace for that. No worries, no worries. But whatever you think of Lent and this season of preparation, the main idea of Lent, the main idea of these days leading up to Resurrection Sunday is to prepare our hearts and lives for Jesus. To prepare our hearts and lives for Jesus. Leading up to this chief of all Christian holidays, right? The most important Christian holiday is not the 4th of July. It's not Halloween. It's not even Christmas. It's Resurrection Sunday, Easter, when we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. We have these days to think and pray and prepare and such. So as the days get closer on this Sunday before Palm Sunday, we proclaim again, here comes Jesus. Here comes Jesus. And I thought that a good way to do that would be to look at what Jesus was up to on the days before Palm Sunday. And for that, we can look to the account in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Can we read some of it together? Why don't you stand with me? Let's read aloud together just some of these key verses in the middle of chapter 11, starting with verse 17. Let's just read this aloud together. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is come into the world. Well, this is God's word, and you can be seated. This episode in chapter 11 is really a turning point in the account of Jesus. This moment in the life and ministry of Jesus, like I said, is the prelude to Passion Week, that week that starts with Palm Sunday and ends with Resurrection Sunday, Easter. Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead has everything to do with the crowds that welcomed Jesus, hailing him as king on that Palm Sunday. And Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead has everything to do with the plots of the religious leaders to murder him on that following Friday. Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead is really the spark that lights the fire of all that happens in Holy Week, in Passion Week. Now, I don't know what you think about this notion that Jesus gave life to this dead man, Lazarus. Can God bring the dead back to life? Amen. Can he? Does God bring the dead back to life? I mean, we have people in this congregation who were dead once. One of them just left because his phone rang. It's like, hey, Wayne, I had a moment for you, and out he went. Dick was dead once. How long were you dead, Dick?
I'm not sure how long it was. Probably only about an hour.
Yeah, I mean, so dead Dick. I'm glad you aren't anymore. Wayne. The paramedics were there working on him, beating on him for several, like 40, 50 minutes. 68. So I'm glad that Dan knows the story because Wayne's not here to tell it. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but go ahead. If you don't believe it, go ahead and argue with these guys. I suppose we could explain that away, right? I mean, reanimating a dead body after a matter of minutes, even several minutes, even an hour, maybe isn't that hard to believe. But John says that Jesus brought his friend Lazarus back to life after being dead for 4 days. That's harder to explain away. I suspect that most people who don't believe the miracles in the Bible, I suspect that most people who don't believe this account in John 11 just sort of write it off as myth or fairy tale, determining that it never happened. But here's the thing. It appears that nobody denied the miracle that day or the days following, right? Including the enemies of Jesus. It seems that the easiest way to deal with the Jesus problem these days is to simply deny his power, but apparently there was no denying his power. There was no denying that miracle, this miracle, that day. Lazarus was dead, all the way dead for most of a week. And Jesus brought him back to life. It's the sort of thing that got everyone's attention. It's the sort of thing that should have our attention. So John 11, it begins with where and who. The where is Bethany. Bethany essentially is like a first-tier, first-ring suburb of Jerusalem. It was usually home base for Jesus when he was in Jerusalem. Generally stayed in Bethany when he was in and out of Jerusalem. There's a who here. The main characters are Lazarus. Martha and Mary, his sisters. It says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. We can read about that in the Gospels. So the sisters sent word to Jesus. They sent word to Jesus saying, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Lazarus. Don't know much about his personality or how he was wired, but we do know a fair amount about his sisters Mary and Martha. It appears that they were those in the family who were very different from one another. Do you have those in your families that are very different from one another? I come from such a family. I have one brother, 2 years younger than me, Randy. Great guy, really great guy. Randy has been a children's pastor all of his life. A really good one. Those of you who know me, do you think that I'd be any good being a children's pastor? No. I love your children. I really do. I love them so much that's why Pastor Allison is here. But Randy is a really good children's. We're very different. I mean, obviously, similar backgrounds, from the same family, raised the same way, but we're very different in terms of how we see things. I am part of a family like that. We have 2 sons, Alex and Donnie. They are very, very different. Very different from one another. They're both awesome in their own ways, but very different. That's how Mary and Martha were. Mary appeared to lead with her heart. She was all about relationships. Mary loved to give extravagant gifts and enjoy the company of friends. Martha appeared to lead with her head and her hands. She was all about things making sense and things getting done. Martha's love language was service. If Mary and Martha attended our church, Mary would be the one lingering at the altars. Martha would be the one getting things set up ahead of time and getting things cleaned up afterward. We'd like to have both of them around, right? It turns out that we do have both of those types around, both Mary types and Martha types, and we're glad about that. So when the sisters sent word to Jesus, it was likely that they had different motives. Mary would want Jesus to know so that he could care. Martha would want Jesus to know so he could fix it. Right? Yeah. Thank you for listening. Right? There's a lesson there, right? A listening lesson there. Have you ever been in a situation where the outcomes sought by the one talking, doing the talking, sending the message, where the outcomes sought by the one sending the message is very different than the assumptions of the one hearing the message? Maybe this is a marriage seminar. Have you ever been in that? Right? It can be really frustrating when all you want is for someone to care, yet they try to fix it. Right? Or when you really want someone to fix it, all they want to do is empathize. That's where I find myself more often than not, right? I'm telling you this so that you'll fix it, and you say, oh, that must be really hard on you. Well, yeah, fix it! Or when you want someone to just listen and care and be there, and I make this mistake, and I get in there and I try to fix it. It can be quite frustrating, can't it? Well, in this case, Jesus was receiving the same message, one message from 2 different sisters who likely expected different outcomes. Sounds like trouble. But we can be confident that Jesus could solve such a puzzle, right? Verse 4 says, when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Notice that Jesus didn't say that Lazarus would not die. We might read it that way, but that's not what he said. He didn't say that Lazarus would not die, that death would not be part of the picture. You see, just what he said is that death would not be the end of things. That death would not be the end of things here. We who have walked with Jesus for a while know that he does not promise to keep us from pain. He does not promise to keep us from sickness or even death. But rather, he promises that he will have the final word. That he'll have the final word. Death or anything that leads up to it does not have the final word. Not for any of us. And that's the message of Resurrection Sunday, right? Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back? You see, opposition was mounting, and his disciples knew that it would be dangerous in Bethany. There was a price on his head. They were out for him. It'd be dangerous in Bethany or anywhere near Jerusalem, let alone in Jerusalem. So they tried to keep him from going. But Jesus explained that it was still time to do miracles. It was still time to do miracles. That walking in the light of God's path never fails, and to do anything other than answer his call in this way would be a mistake. It'd be stumbling. Verse 11, after he had said this, Jesus went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. And his disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought they meant like sleep. Remember, this is just a week out from Good Friday. So the disciples had been with Jesus for quite a long while now. One might think that they would get it now, but they didn't. They didn't get it. So if you're like me and you don't always get it, it's okay. You're in good company. And Jesus, seeing that they didn't get it, said, you knuckleheads. No, I'm sorry. Verse 14, so then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe, but let's go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of his disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. We know a bit about Thomas as well, and his personality. And it seems like he had a personality a bit like Martha's. He was practical. Thomas was practical. A thinker who said what was on his mind. Now, while there is irony in his statement here, let's go ahead and go and die with him. I mean, theologically, we who believe in Jesus, we die with him. He was right about that. And historically, Thomas, although not there in Bethany, and not even right away after Jesus died and rose again, but Thomas did, along with most of the others, they did die with him. They were martyred. While there was irony in the statement, I don't think that there was sarcasm in the statement. I think we often, somewhere along the way we labeled Thomas doubting Thomas, and we read his words with sarcasm. I don't think that there was sarcasm there. I think this was a moment of leadership for Thomas, a sign of devotion and loyalty to Jesus. There were a number of moments when these men who would profess their loyalty to Jesus like this, listen, we'll die with you, even if they didn't always live up to such bold predictions. So off they went. On his arrival, verse 17 says, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Like I said, Martha wanted Jesus to fix it. He could have fixed it 4 days ago. But he could still fix it now. And then they got into this theological discussion. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, well, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. She had good theology. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Martha, do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. Jesus was preaching the same sermon here that I generally preach at funerals. If I'm your pastor and I get to bury you, I'm going to preach something like this. That death is not the end. That there is God's promise of resurrection. There was controversy surrounding resurrection theology in those days. The Sadducees said there was no resurrection. That's why they were sad, you see, right? I mean, that's how Melina keeps track of it. Me too. The Sadducees believed there wasn't any resurrection. The Pharisees believed that they were, and this is one of the things that they fought about because theologians like to fight. Weird, isn't it? But nobody made the controversial claim that Jesus made that day. Jesus said, I am the resurrection. Not merely a hope to be held out in one's heart or a theology to be debated. Jesus said that the resurrection is a person, that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. That whoever believes in Jesus lives, even though we pass through death, we live forever. Jesus said, I am the resurrection. And these were the claims that got Jesus in trouble. These were the claims that religious leaders judged as blasphemy. Jesus was again claiming to be God, quite boldly. And Martha demonstrated that his claims were taking hold in people's hearts. She believed that Jesus was the Messiah, that Jesus was the Son of God, who came into the world and was standing there right in front of her in the shadow of her brother's tomb. In verse 28, Mary enters the scene. Verse 32 says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The words from Mary were almost exactly the same as the words from her sister Martha, but there was a different tone. Martha led with her head and believed. Mary led with her heart and believed. And the way that Jesus engaged each was different. With Martha, Jesus had a theological discussion. But with Mary, it was different. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. And then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Jesus wept. Mere moments earlier, Jesus saw that Martha needed answers. But with Mary, Jesus saw that it was presence that was needed. Sometimes what we need most is merely someone with whom to cry, right? In that moment, the man Jesus cried, sharing this moment of grief. And in that moment, God cried. Think of it. Touched with emotion and grief as a mourner. Aren't we glad? Aren't we glad that Jesus deals with each of us differently? You know, this is a church where it is okay to meet Jesus in our way. It's okay to meet Jesus emotionally. It's okay to meet Jesus rationally. It's okay to meet Jesus experientially. We need to give room for Jesus to deal with people individually, right? Even if their way is different from ours. Sometimes it takes more time. Sometimes it's like mind-spinningly fast. Sometimes it gets in through our heads. Sometimes it gets in through our work together. Sometimes it goes directly through our hearts. Head first, heart first, hand first. Jesus meets us in all sorts of ways, and we celebrate that here at North Shore. We're glad for that, aren't we? Verse 38, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. I mean, it's a pretty dramatic moment, right? Maybe you've seen it portrayed in a play or a movie. Maybe you've seen it portrayed in that greatest of all art forms, human video. Has anybody done a human video of this? I knew somebody would have. Lolita, pastor's kid, going to fine arts festival, doing... Yeah, you've seen, it's a dramatic moment. You know, it seems to me that we often get this moment wrong. It seems that when this moment is portrayed, the one playing Jesus calls for the stone to be rolled away with confidence in a God voice. Roll the stone away. It's often cast in a mucho macho Jesus moment, right? As if Jesus rolled up in his pickup truck, complete with a gun rack and an NRA sticker on the back. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Jensen. Jesus rolling up to save the day. Like Chris Angel coming up to astound the crowd with a magic trick. Jesus shows up with the great authority and commands that the stone be removed from the tomb. But a careful reading here indicates that it was likely that it was in the soft voice of a mourner that Jesus asked the stone be rolled away. Take the stone away. Not necessarily the commanding voice of a miracle worker, at least not yet. And it seemed that Martha understood that Jesus was still operating as a mourner, one who wanted to pay respects to his friend, when she explained, Jesus, by this time, there's going to be a bad odor, for he's been in there for 4 days. This is a closed casket funeral now. Right? The time for mourning over the body has passed. It's been 4 days. Martha was right that the time had passed for this kind of mourning. That should be winding down long ago, but she didn't have it all right. Then Jesus said, verse 40, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." He's praying, right? "I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here." And this is him acknowledging that sometimes praying out loud is important, as it builds faith. He could have prayed silently, but he prayed out loud to build faith of all of those around, so that they may believe, he said. And when he had prayed, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out! Lazarus, come out!" And he did. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face, the way that you did in those days with dead people. It wasn't until after that moment of prayer that Jesus spoke in this commanding confidence. It wasn't until it was time for the glory of God to be revealed that he reversed this death sentence, calling out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out of there." What Jesus had explained theologically was then a practical reality. Jesus, the resurrection and the life, could not be denied in the face of this spectacular miracle that no one denied. Therefore, it says, many Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, they believed. They believed in him. You see, at that moment, a line was drawn in the sand, if you will. Decisions were made. Some believed, and others were threatened. Some joined Martha in acknowledging that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, and others plotted to take his life. I mean, we know the end of the story. And just like the sickness that sees Lazarus did not end in death, yet death was part of the path of Jesus did not end in death, even though that death was part of the plan. Right? So here we are today. And we're faced with a same the same decision, really, right? We are all faced to answer the question, well, who is Jesus then? Will we believe that Jesus is who he says he is? Will we believe that Jesus is who he says he is? Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And then he asked this question to Martha, do you believe? Do you believe this? And he asked the same question to us. Let me say it out loud. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe that Jesus, the one who miraculously raised Lazarus to life, can replace the deadness of our lives with the everlasting life that he promises? Do we believe this? Do we believe that the one who conquered death with his own resurrection can deliver life to us? Do we believe this? You know, I wonder, do we dare hear Jesus call our name from deep inside our own tombs? Do we dare hear Jesus call our names from deep inside our own tombs? Where there is sickness, could Jesus call us out to life? Where there is sin and disobedience, could Jesus call us out to life? Where there is doubt and questions and faithlessness, could Jesus call us out to life? I know many of us have heard that call of Jesus. Could Jesus call us to life again this morning? Lazarus, come out. Steve, come out. Lauren, come out. Chris, come out. Can you put your own name in there? Come out. Could Jesus call us out of our death and deadness and darkness into his light and his life? Love is greater, right? Love is greater, especially when it's God's love for us. God's love for you, God's love for me. Love is greater. Greater than questions, greater than doubts, greater than challenges, greater than sickness, greater even than our sin. God's love is greater. Now, perhaps you've never responded to that call. Come out. Hear Jesus call your name. Make today your day. Believe today. As best you can, believe today. Come out and receive the life promised by Jesus. In a couple of minutes, our kids are going to come down, and we're going to have a bake sale, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But we have a few minutes. Would you stand with me? Cam's come. He's just going to take a few minutes and just kind of quietly lead us in a song, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond. I'm just convinced that if we'll quiet our hearts and tune our ears, we can hear Jesus call our names, calling us to come out, to leave some dead thing behind and walk into his light and life. And this is a moment when we can respond to that. You can respond right where you are. You can respond in your own hearts. I'm going to pray in a moment. You can pray along with me and respond that way. Maybe you'd like to come to one of these altars for a moment. We're just going to take a couple of minutes to let this sink in, and then I'm going to come back and we'll have a bit of benediction and we'll get on with our day. Today's a day to believe, friend. You can have this life promised by Jesus. And it's okay. Can I say it again? It's okay if you still have questions. It's okay if you still have pain or failure. Believe today and begin to receive the life that only Jesus can give. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for calling our names. Lord, I don't believe it's any coincidence at all that each and every one is here in this place today. Lord, thank you for calling our names, to bringing us to yourself. Thank you for the life that you promise, the life that you give. Help us, God, by giving us gifts of faith to receive. We trust you, and we take these moments to believe in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you, friends. Let's take a moment.